lab in the Hoover Loofer Aquaculture Lab. It's named after Mick Hoover, who's been working with us for over 20 years on this, especially with the previous instructor, Mr. Roach, and also with Mark Loofer, who had a tilapia farm up north. And so we have various partnerships, including with the Idaho Fish and Game. Garden Creek Farms has helped us out. We like working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And also recognize Mr. Roach, who collected all these fish tanks for government surplus. One of the things that we want to have with these fish labs is a little bit of biosecurity. And so here we have a foot bath, and that is the top of a garbage can, because those all get tossed most of the time by the school when they buy garbage cans, those 50-gallon pails. And then we've got a a scouring pad that they use for wax, or for peeling stuff off the floors. So there's that. Now, coming in, students to not put their hands in any of the fish tanks. Now, we've broken up our systems into two systems, one being a blue system. Those fish belong to the state of Idaho, and so we consider them public fish, and they actually give us some fish food and resources to help raise those. And then we plant those in local waterways. Then we have the red system. That's our commercial system, and we're trying to get recognized as a certified disease-free facility that would allow us to take those fish in the blue tanks and stock them in any water throughout the state of Idaho, including waters outside of the state. So we'll give you a brief tour on how this all goes. Right here we have some sturgeon. Now, most of these are a year old. The larger one is 2 years old now. And this is the basic tank construction that you'll want to follow. It is by far the best. You want the manure to come out of the tank and to be under no pressure so that it'll settle out appropriately. So in order to do that, you'll want the following. Okay, one, you'll want to have a standpipe. Now, this standpipe is going to be a pipe that maintains the level of the water. I'm going to go ahead and show you what our standpipe looks like. That's it. That's the standpipe. It maintains the water level. Now, you don't want fish going down there. Now, if you just put a standpipe in the center of a tank, you're going to have one problem. And that problem is, as it is right now, is that the solids, the fish manure, will settle at the bottom, and it will stay at the bottom. So what we've put together is a larger pipe that sits over it, and it has some holes, and you have the holes as big as you need to have so that the fish don't get sucked up. And so on the top of it, we've got a black piece of ABS with some holes cut in it. If you did not have any holes in the top of this, what would happen is the water level would actually come up past the top of it, and it'd create a siphon, and it would suck all the water out of the tank, which isn't something that you want. So this outer pipe that goes over the standpipe needs to be slightly taller than the standpipe that's in the center of the tank. Now, a couple other little things that help out. Daily maintenance. If students will go ahead and just rock this, that will help the manure that's collected on the inside, and it will end up getting sucked down through the drain pipe. Now, let's say, worst case scenario, it gets really plugged up. Say we have some fish die off, maybe 2 or 3, that's all it'd take. Let's say we've got some fungus, or somebody fed the fish too much, and that should plug up. These holes in the top allow the water level to come up and for the water to drain down. And that way you don't have water coming up over the tank where the fish are more likely to follow it down onto the concrete. Now, let's say this should get plugged up also on the top, and it's possible. If you have somebody that gets really excited feeding the fish, then you'll want to have a emergency drain. Now, if your fish are smaller, I recommend, here's the following things you can do. You could drill holes in your tank just some small ones, or you could have a bulkhead tank fitting, and with that you could put a plug or have a piece of PVC pipe coming off of it with a cap with small holes to keep fish from coming out. What that does is it buys you time until you come and check on the fish, so that you don't have water cascading down. Now, there's lots of different ways to oxygenate for fish, and my favorite, at least with most of the species that we have in this fish lab, is the spray bar. Now this, okay, back to the spray bar. We like the spray bar. It's adjustable, we can turn it off. Now anytime you should turn off anything like this, my recommendation is to have a ball cap and wear it sideways. So if you should walk past anybody, they'd be like, hey, why are you dressed up like a weirdo? It'll remind you that you turned something off, because that will definitely kill fish, so we're going to turn it back on. So a couple things I like about the spray bar is you can see where it's working and how the flow is. Really easy, okay? I also like to be able to change it. So for trout and fish that like to swim against the current, it's good to have some current. They like to swim into that current. And it also helps move all the solids in a circular pattern, which also helps it drain better. Okay? Now for the sturgeon, they don't want to swim against too strong of a current. So I like all of that stuff about the spray bar. I have everything glued in except for this section right here, and it's just wedged in there so we can change it as necessary. Now, problem that you'll have with a spray bar is the following. Fish like trout, depending on its species and what have you, they like to jump up into flowing water. So for some species of fish, they're going to try to come up that way, and you'll find them on the ground. And you can limit that by giving them some shade and putting a net over this, and we can show you a couple things that can work with that. If you're worried about that and you don't want them jumping out, one of the other easy things that you can do is to have this come up instead and drop it into a larger pipe. Now, it's going to have to come up pretty high up off of this, and then you'll get those little coke green looking things. I'll try to find you some real quick. This is our tilapia system that we're not using at the moment. This is it. So what you'd have is you'd have a much larger pipe, and then it would drain into the top of it, and you'd have these coming down. Now the water can go ahead and spray, and it comes down to this pipe, and as it goes along here, that water is going to be having lots of contact with oxygen. And then this pipe would sit down at the very bottom of the tank, and in order to keep some flow, I would have a larger hole off to the side, or several smaller holes so fish wouldn't be able to get into them, or you could put a screen. And I would have those holes pointed in the direction, so then you can turn the direction of that pipe, and that water would flow in whatever direction. You'd have it flowing this way if you want to be able to create a couple eddies and some calmer areas for the fish, or you could turn it this way to have more turbulent flow, or you could have it pointed off in the direction of the standpipe but not quite off to the side of the tank. And so that's one strategy. In fact, it's one that I'm going to employ because we have these Arctic grayling that are terrible when it comes to jumping up and out of the tank. So I'll get a video of what that'll look like here in the next distant future. So that's a little bit about spray bars. So those are okay. So the water's going to come down through that center pipe, and then it's going to come through a drain pipe, and this is where ours is at, and it comes up and around, and it goes to these settling tanks. Now these particular settling tanks, the purpose of them is to have the solids come in at a slow rate so that it will be down there at the bottom. And we're always working on some stuff, so if you see some hacksaws or something, it's just because we're still finishing some projects. So we've got our settling tanks. Manure's going to settle down at the very bottom. Now in the past, we've actually had to use a pump or a siphoning hose to get the solids out. Well, never more, okay? My recommendation for anybody that does this is to get one of these blue 50-gallon drums. And when you do that, this is what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to come up through the bottom. Most of these have two openings. One of them is usually a quick fitting, and then there's another one that is an actual pipe fitting. And so it'll take a 2-inch male PVC end on it. And then what you do is you have your drain pipe coming into it, and then there's a T. And so you'd actually just set this thing down on it, you screw in the thing, and then you glue it in place, and you'll actually shimmy the bucket a little bit and turn it a little bit so you get a good coating. And then you put a shut-off valve here. Now with that shut-off valve, you're able to open this thing up and drain all of the manure out quickly. Okay. Now for us, we rarely drain this one out, but it's also a great idea to be able to put something on here with a flexible hose so that you can go to a drain. Okay, so back to those settling tanks. This is from the older setup that we have. So we're pulling from both settling tanks. Next time that I do something like this, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a primary, and then I'll have a secondary settling tank. And I'll draw a picture of what that should look like for you, so you'll have a good idea. In fact, let's go do that right now. Okay, so here I've drawn a fish tank. Sorry about the lights, it'll provide a little glare for us. With this fish tank, see we've got some live fish, and somebody will always notice a dead one. Here we have a standpipe, then we've got that other pipe that's on over the top of it, and that's going to suck the manure up through the space here and go down through our pipe. Okay. Otherwise, if you didn't have this pipe, it'd only take the water off of the top. So this is the best way because you'll actually suction the crap out from here. Other systems that'll be advertised will be pumping water from the bottom, and you don't want to do that because you want that waste to be moving real slow so it'll settle out. Okay. If you're pumping this, your pump and your pipes are just going to get clogged up, and it's going to lead to lots of problems. I've killed way too many fish that way in previous systems at a different school. Okay, so here we've got this particular system, and then we've got our overflow, just in case something should happen here that we can keep water coming off of it. Okay, so the water's going to come down through this pipe, and then this is what I was talking about with a second stage settling. You want to have this pipe come up, and you'll have a T, and it'll come up through the bottom of the barrel. Now the barrel's just going to, you could weld up a little table for it to sit on, or you could have some cinder blocks. Okay. Now the water can also run out through here when you open up a valve, and that'll help you clean out the settling tank. Otherwise, you're siphoning or putting a pump in there, and you're not likely to find some students that want to do that job. Okay, so you want to have some type of elbow in the bottom of this. Now, how to get that elbow in there? Good luck. I haven't figured out a real good way. You'll need somebody who's maybe 7.5 feet tall with arms that can put in an elbow there. But it's better to have the water shoot out as it's settling, and that way it'll rotate down here instead of wanting to come up. So you'll get a better settling action if it'll shoot out and swirl. Okay, and if it could be a little higher up, that way it doesn't disturb anything that's already down here at the bottom. Okay, now what I'm going to do in future systems is this be the primary settling tank. Okay, and then I'll have a bulkhead tank fitting with PVC going to the next tank, which would be secondary, and I would have a pipe that sits in there, and then down here, not touching the bottom per se, but up above it so it doesn't disturb stuff that's been settled out, and I want it to shoot out this way. And then higher up, this is where I would have a pipe that leads to the pump. Okay, and that's what I would do. Now, other opportunities, say you're not going to do a sand filter. This would be the place in my mind that you'd want to add some biofiltration. And I'll show you what we can use for biofiltration in a little bit when I show you the sand filter that we have. Okay, but you'll settle out most of your solids here, you'll settle out whatever else is here, and then you'll have a pump that doesn't get grimy and fill up a lot. Now my recommendation for larger systems is a Hayward pump. Okay, they've got these Hayward pumps that have a basket in them. In fact, I even had a crawdad. We were raising a couple crawdads in cold water, and I've even had crawdads end up in the net basket and live for weeks, even though they've got all this water shooting past them. So we'll catch some fish. Rarely will you find live fish in there, but I have. But we'll show you another option for what you could do if you don't have a pump that has a screen on it. This will work out real well. Okay, so let's say you need a screen. Here's your screen right here. I have a bulkhead tank fitting. And this goes to a quieter pump. Okay. And with this, we have a reducer that sits into a coupler, which goes into a section of pipe, which has a cap. And there we have all these little holes that got drilled into it. Somebody got in trouble one particular day. Okay, that's an easy filter. You can reach down, get your arm wet, and you can run a hose through that, and you can have that cleaned up. So let's talk filtration. Okay, so let's talk about a pump. So here's our two settling tanks. Here we have our Hayward pool pump. That's what it looks like. It has a basket that's in there that helps filter out fish and other things that you don't want to get in there. We showed you the other filter that you could do if you wanted to use a smaller pump. Now this water pumps up and it comes through the sand filter. Now this sand filter is a Taguilus, and Pentair is selling them now. It has various options. It has a filter, it has a rinse, it has a recirculation. So essentially when that happens, you can bypass this filter altogether. And check this out. I'll go ahead and do the bypass and you'll see how much more flow that we've got. So the sand will actually really decrease what you got. You can see we're flowing a lot of water in those cases. In fact, sometimes it'll blow out the little valves and things, or the spray bars that we have. Okay, so we can recirculate, we can backwash. From time to time, I want to fluff the sand, and that because over time solids will really slow down the pressure. So I backflow it or backwash it, and that way we can get rid of some of those solids, fluff the sand, and then our pressure goes up. Now, I had myself a concern a while ago. I put on this new pump. It was working really well, but we've obviously filled up a bunch of pores in the sand, okay? And I realized that it really cut down how much water we could actually move. In fact, it worked really good for 2 tanks, but on a 3rd tank, it seemed like I had to fluff the sand a lot. And then I added a bunch of other tanks. Well, my mind got working, and I got thinking that I don't need to filter 100% of the water all the time, especially if I can settle out a lot of the solids beforehand. And so having an increased flow will do a really good job at getting the solids out of the fish tanks. So when I was thinking of that, what I decided to do was I was going to have a bypass valve. And so I've got a bypass valve that helps increase the pressure so that I can have more tanks running on this system. So it works for us. Now, if I was working with tilapia and I had a sand filter like this, I probably wouldn't be messing with it. Now let's talk about tilapia. So there's a lot of stuff that grows in warm water, and I worry about having a sand filter unless you can get a lot of stuff filtered out before you get to it. The sand filter works great. It's a great home for the nitrifying bacteria. I think they'll take a bunch of ammonia out. I think you'll also have your nitrites convert to nitrates very well. But the cheapest, by far the cheapest and easiest route to go would be these floor scouring pads. Now there's various options on how to get these. You can buy them, for one. Two, you could reuse the ones that the school wants to toss because they don't want to hold on to them. And then if you do that, just remember that nature's solution of pollution is dilution. Just soak it in a lot of water, change the water various times. I don't think you'll have as big of a problem. If you're worried about the chemicals and things, and you're less scrupulous, you could ask the custodian to give you some, or even just wait till the custodial closet is left open. You didn't hear that from me though. So back to this filtration. It provides a great home for nitrifying bacteria. A bunch of aquaculture supply companies will try to sell you some bio balls and all these other things. Look at the surface area on this. You can't beat the surface area that's going to be on this or sand. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than what they're going to try to sell you for biofiltration, okay? But look, it conveniently fits really well inside of a settling tank made out of a 50-gallon drum, okay? You'll just want to have some type of system that'll help hold it down. Use that hole there, run some wires through it that's not going to corrode, perhaps stainless steel welding iron or welding rod. That'd probably work the best. So let's talk about a little creativity. A lot of times all we need really is a small fish tank. As I got putting in these tanks, a lot of times I found out that I wanted to just have different fish so the students can learn about their mannerisms and about different care for them and be able to work on identification. Now, as I got thinking and looking into a lot of this stuff, I went up to the University of Idaho. Now, look at this tank. Just humongous. Now, this was a recycled tank that would have been thrown out. We used a pool paint that had two different things that you mixed together and worked really well. Really revitalized this tank. So we're going to have a bunch of catchables in here that we'll be releasing later. Okay. But what I want to get at is you don't need large tanks exactly, especially for smaller fish. So here we have some sturgeon, and these are in a much smaller tank. Now, many of you might not know what these are, and I don't even know if they actually make them anymore. But I went up to the University of Idaho, and I looked at one of their little research facilities, and they had these little fiberglass tanks. And I said, gosh, that's perfect for what I'd like to do. And I looked at the price, and they were $250. And I was even considering buying a couple. Well, at that moment, I went outside, and somebody had dropped off one of these tanks with a bunch of horseshoes for students to use for projects, okay? And what these tubs are is they sold, I don't know if it was the Crystal X brand, but essentially it was a feed supplement that had a bunch of molasses in it. And as I looked at those tanks, and I know they had to be really sturdy in order to survive 1,200 pound animals that are sucking at the molasses. So that's what we did, is we got these things. Now, I don't have standpipes, I just have little filters or little drains in the bottoms of them, and I'll show you what we did there. But these didn't cost anything. A bunch of ranchers have got them stored up, and that worked out really well for us. Another thing that you can do to be a little creative, I went to a consignment auction. This was for a fundraiser for the elementary school, and this is a shower insert. Now, this thing has actually been sold annually 4 times, and I was able to pick it up for $5. So I put a hole in the bottom using a bi-hole saw. I used some silicone, and there I've got the drain. Where the actual drain was, I just put a piece of PVC that I glued in there, and I put a cap on it. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the differences between some of them. Here we've got some rainbows in that particular system. Now remember, the other ones I had a drain in it. What I did with those, I had an external standpipe. Okay, and we can show you what an external standpipe looks like. Here I've got a standpipe, and I'll have to show you on one. So there's the standpipe there, and then here's the cover. Okay. Now on the end of it, I took the little plastic insert that you use to put this. This is actually for a drain, and I found out that it works really good. And we'll have to show you that what this is. It's pretty neat. And we just lost a fish down it. Okay. Now, interesting note. I don't know if you can see them, but there's some smaller ones in here. Any of these fish that tend to be more blue tend to be smaller. And when you're looking at trout, if you have one that's lighter in color, for whatever reason, they tend to grow faster. So there we've got a little blue rainbow trout in there, and he's going to grow much slower than all the rest of them. If it's a white or a blondish looking trout, it'll grow much faster. Just one thing that I've noticed. And then them being in these particular tanks, they're very light colored fish. I can put those into a darker tank, and they'll change colors within an hour. So that's what we've got for those internal ones. And then we're set up so we can hatch. This is a basic upweller. Oh wow, I guess we can talk about upwellers. Okay, easiest way for hatching fish, and you can probably find these via surplus. So what you have is you have a pipe that leads down into this interior pipe. And you know what, I think this corner's too dark. So here we have an upweller. Okay, so here we have an upweller, and that's kind of what it looks like. You like to have a clear one. The students can build these, they're pretty easy. So simply what happens is water comes down through the top of this, comes down, and then it percolates up, and it's going to move your eggs. Now depending on what eggs you have, you want them in the eye stage when you start tumbling them. So they'll see two little eyes, and they can either just sit on the pad if you don't have very many, but if you have a lot, you want them to tumble, and they'll just kind of flow like this. And what that does is the dead ones will take on air, and they'll float up to the top. You want them to float up because they'll start to grow fungus. And if they touch all the rest of them, then you're going to have problems with fungus growing throughout all the eggs. They used California hatching trays. A lot of people did. And what they found with those is you have to go through with the turkey baster and pull out dead eggs all the time. Okay. Now on this one, to keep the eggs off of the bottom, I've got a section that I cut out of a scouring pad, and that's worked really well. Now people that are professionally hatching out eggs are using formaldehyde, and that is to kill off the fungus, and that's what the industry has been doing. But lately in Idaho, we've had great success with copper scouring pads. You can buy those in any grocery store. Put a couple of them on the bottom. Now everybody will say that copper kills fish, but if this is a single pass and you've got fresh water coming into it, the copper is going to kill anything that's in there except for the fish. And it's worked as good as formaldehyde, and it's much safer to use than the formaldehyde. So those are some rainbow trout. You can see that they're always hungry. Oh, at the top, I used, instead of a fly screen, somebody called it a cat screen. It's a little thicker than that, and that's just to keep the fish from getting sucked down. So that's what that looks like. So let's look at what a exterior standpipe would look like. So let's talk about exterior standpipes. When it comes to exterior standpipes, nobody's really making them. You can go throughout the industry and you can probably find something that'll work, but you're looking at a lot of money for those. Your best friend is to make your own exterior standpipe, and I'm going to show you how to do that. What you're going to use is this wire wheel, and that's going to be your best best friend when it comes to working with aquaculture stuff. Okay, so let's make ourselves an exterior standpipe. Now what I like about having an exterior standpipe, even though I prefer a standpipe in the tanks, an exterior standpipe allows you to have a drain at the very bottom. Now, word of caution when it comes to a drain at the very bottom is it can get plugged up, so make sure that in each individual tank that you have a bypass or an overflow is what I mean to say. So you want to have an overflow in those cases. You could even have a drain that's elevated, perhaps in your bulkhead tank fitting, have a piece of pipe with a glued on piece or a cap that sits on it, and then have holes all the way along it, so that as the holes plug up on the bottom, you can have holes near the top, and then you'll want to be able to pull that drain out. So let's talk about an exterior standpipe. I think it's a great thing to have for kids to see because it's an easy way to explain what a standpipe does, which maintains the water level in the fish tank. And they're going to see exterior standpipes everywhere. As I was saying earlier, it is a tough way to find exterior standpipes. They're very tough to find. And if you can find them, they're going to overprice them. So this is my creation. I haven't seen anybody else do this, so I don't know. Maybe I'll patent it or something. So what I've got is a 2-inch coupler. Okay, and then inserted and glued about halfway into the 2-inch coupler is a reducer. And I went from a 2-inch reducer to a 1/2 inch. So it reduces from 2 inches to a 1/2 inch. And as you might know, this is what a reducer looks like. So what I did is I took it over to a wire wheel that's on a bench grinder, and I took that lip off, because this is what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to put a T on it, like so. And then you're going to glue it. Now, I know that type of gluing project really doesn't fit in with code, but you got to remember this pipe is never going to be under extreme pressure, and if you're careful with the way you glue it, you'll never have any leaks. At least I haven't, okay? I've got this one just for demonstrations, okay? And so what happens is the water comes down from the tank, and then it has to go in through this T, okay? Now, in order to go down into where you'll have it come down and it'll go down into your settling tank, in order to go down, it has to go up the standpipe. And so the standpipe is simply going to sit in to that 1/2 inch reducer. Okay? So the water is going to have to come in, then it's going to have to go up through the middle pipe, and then it's going to have to come down. So you can make these of any size. You could get 4-inch PVC, and then you could have it reduced down to 1 inch, which would make a lot more sense at times. But for little teeny tanks, this works really well. Now, as I was thinking about this, I came up with a really fancy wand to pull this thing out. But in all reality, all you need is another 1/2 inch PVC pipe that has a coupler, so it slides down on the PVC. Once you get it on, you can pull it out fairly easy, okay? Or you could even have it twist in and out. You can try some different things. This one, I really didn't need the bolt. It actually caused more problems for me than anything else. But you see the end on this? This is ballooned out so that another piece of 1/2 inch PVC pipe could just slide into it, okay? Now, if you get another 2-inch piece of pipe, that's your pipe that's going to be on the outside, okay? You can have it cut, and you can have it ballooned up at the top too. And that'll make it easier to retrieve your standpipe, okay? So, daily maintenance goes like this. Now this 2-inch pipe isn't long enough, mind you. Okay, this 2-inch pipe isn't long enough. But notice our water comes in, it's going to come up, and in order to go down, it's going to suction all the crap out of this pipe, okay? You just want to pull that standpipe because you're going to have manure that's going to settle down in here, okay? And it'll slow it down and impede things, okay? Now, one idea that I had was to keep this manure flowing. And so I think this will work really well is if you have a piece of pipe and a 45 degree and then another piece of pipe and another 45 degree. As that water comes in, it's going to get some centrifugal force, and then it's going to get in here, and I think it'll spin a little bit for you, okay? Or it'll have some force like that, instead of having the water come in straight in, okay? Anyways, that's a thought that I've got. I've attempted at it, and it seems to work all right. I don't know if the science would back it, but I think having a slight curve coming in here is ideal, okay? And one could do it that way by having two 45s. I think a 90 would be too sharp, but two 45s you could get a really good curve going into this, okay? Another way you could do it would be to use a heat gun and bend it. So let's talk about providing air for your fish. Right now I've actually got hooked up to an air compressor, but I've got this regenerative air blower, and you just connect some PVC in and run that to where your fish is. And I'll show you how you tap into that to put in some air lines. Okay, so if you want to use PVC to deliver air, this is the best thing that you can get. This is a little piece from Gemco, and it's a neat little valve, okay? And you just have to twist the top on this. There you go, and it's closed, okay? Now, they sell a drill bit, and what you do is you'd actually just drill into the PVC, and then you just take any drill, it has a chuck that you can open up, okay? And then you'll insert this piece into the chuck. Like so. And what you have, so on that piece there was an area that's barbed for the hose, and that's the one you'll put in the chuck. And then you've got these threads here, and this is self-tapping. So then all you have to do is put that where you drilled, you hit it, and it'll self-tap directly into the PVC. And so that's probably the easiest way. Now you can open these things up with the barbed ends on this. You can put on some tubing of any sorts, and then you can have that go to the least expensive air stones that'll work for you, because the students will drop those air stones in the bottom of the tank and break them. So you'll run air through some tubing, and then you'll drop it down into an air stone. And what's great about these air stones is peace of mind. Now, I had mentioned that the students were just going to drop them and break them, and sure enough, there's an example of one that's been broken. Okay, so get cheap air stones. Alright, that's what those look like. So let's say everything should hit the fan. What are you going to do? You lose power. You got a pump that goes out. Well, here's the solution. Get an oxygen tank and attach it to a wall somewhere. Then I have a regulator just for welding. This one's a Victor Equipment Company. And I have a short hose that comes to a torch handle, and it comes to a tip. Okay. Now you can have this thing attached at all times. That way, let's say you're out of town and somebody checks on the fish lab for you. Hey, we got a problem with the pump. Okay, well, I happen to have a backup pump, and that's a good recommendation, is to have a backup pump for every pump that you need. Okay, but it's going to take them some time to figure out how to attach that pump. So as they're doing that, they need to have some oxygen on. If this is already in, you can even have the PSI preset for them, and that way all they have to do is turn the tank on. Okay, now here's the tubing that I like best. This is the universal bubble tubing, and they use it in hospitals. Okay, and so the tubing looks like this. It's got these bubbled areas. And what I like about that is if you have to do some rigging of your system and you've got different size valves and things, this is a great way to go. Okay, because we can make a cut right there, and by making that cut, we're easily able to slip this over this. Okay, now not only have I used this to save fish when we've had a couple little disasters, but I'll use it for transporting fish. I have a metal cart that's got some brackets on it so that I can take it to the back of the pickup, and I'll use some C-clamps and I'll actually clamp it onto the bed of the pickup. And that way I'll have my oxygen hoses going into some coolers and things that I've drilled some holes through the tops for this purpose. Okay, so that's what you need to do if everything should hit the fan. So let's talk about some basic hygiene stuff. First off, put signs talking about quality control. When you have different systems and you don't want contamination, spray paint your tanks or systems different colors and spray paint the brushes and the nets that you use. And then you want to make sure that this stuff always stays up off the ground. Okay? And have some basic chores for students to do. Have signs tell them not to put their hands in the water. Okay? Any of this stuff teaches those basic hygiene skills that they're going to need. And we'll talk about a few other things here in a moment. So let's talk about covers. What do you want to do to keep fish from jumping? Trout like to have a shady area. In fact, we can demonstrate that real quick now. One easy system is to just use this insulated blue foam board. And that does a couple things. It helps keep your water temperature where it needs to be. Plus, fungus won't grow on this stuff. We've used plywood, and we still have some plywood for covers, but you're going to get stuff that'll grow on that. Nothing grows on this blue foam board, so for that reason I like it. Okay, but let's show you. Here we've got some cutthroat trout, and you can see them coming up. Now most of the time they're just going to stay off into the shade. Just think about trout fishing. Okay, they're going to be underneath that log. That's where they're going to feel comfortable. In fact, we rarely will have any of these cutthroats that'll jump out because they've got this, and so I really don't need a net over the top. Arctic grayling is something different. I wish the Arctic grayling we had were a little more interesting, but they're not. They're still just in the fry size, but they're pretty cool fish. So those fish, they like to feel comfortable like that. They like to have some water flowing, and they like to swim against a current. So what we've got for these guys is just a piece of plywood covering them. If you're worried about the fish jumping out, here's a simple little system for you. This is 1/2-inch PVC, and we actually use this tank in order to bend it. And we use the heat gun. We just heated it up at the points and we bent it, and then we use the shade cloth, and it just sits like that. Now with these smaller tanks, all I've got is a T that comes down, and then we have a valve, and in the valve we've got a section of pipe, and it's just got one little hole drilled through it because we don't have to do much to keep these. And I've got it kind of offset so then I can change the direction of the flow. And so that's what we did for those. So here's some basic things for monitoring. I have a whiteboard, and so I have all the tanks that are listed and feeding instructions for them. Students maintain this, and you can see they come in. For fish that need to be fed 2 to 3 times a day, we'll go ahead and we've broken it up so that they can sign for the morning, afternoon, and evening. And that's been great. Okay. Also, we have jobs that we'll put down, for instance, like cleaning out the pump, cleaning out settling tanks, scrubbing the floor. Also phone numbers for people to contact in case they come in and they find a problem. So that's what we do for making sure that these fish are taken care of on a daily basis. So the students have done a really good job. Now imagine yourself on a trip, if you could have a trail cam or something like that pointing at a whiteboard like this, even just a little one, where students can write the last time the fish were checked on. Okay, that brings you a great amount of peace of mind. Now, there is a science to feeding fish and there's an art to feeding fish, and a teacher really needs to figure out the art. We teach the science to the students, and this is the great reason of why we should have fish labs in schools, is that they have to be able to learn the art. We throw food at the fish, okay? In fact, let's go feed some fish right now. There we go, we got some fish food for our rainbow trout that are very hungry. And we come on over, and you look at those fish. They're hungry, okay? If we see fish that don't want to come up to the top, we better not be feeding them. Maybe just one of them comes up to the top. Why waste the fish food? The fish food's going to do more harm if they're not ready to eat it, because it's just going to break up and break down, and it's going to poison the fish. You're going to have a nitrite problem. So that's the art of feeding fish. So I try to teach the science and the art to feeding fish, but sometimes the art is lost on high schoolers. So one of the techniques that I have so that we don't overfeed fish, especially when I'm at a conference or I'm traveling with other students, is that I put down what I consider to be a maintenance ration, or slightly above a maintenance ration, and I adjust it accordingly. And then it's my job as the instructor to come in on a daily basis to check up on the fish, okay? And as I do that, that's when I practice the art of feeding the fish, and then I feed them accordingly, and that's how they get their growth. So I never mark if I feed the fish, okay? There will be days where the fish only get fed once or twice, and that's usually on the weekends. And I tell the students, oh, that's great, because the weekends is about when we have problems. And the students, you coach them and you teach them what these fish will look like and what to watch out for, and they'll give you a phone call, and then I'm able to talk them through the process so that we can save those fish. If there's any problems with the fish, say you want to move them or anything like that, we withhold feed. So if they're stressed out for whatever reason, we're going to withhold feed until they're not stressed out, because a stressed fish is not going to eat, and it's just going to end up leading to some poisoning issues. So consider having a whiteboard like this, and if you can, have the ability to have a trail cam or a security camera that you can look at from your phone so you can see what's happening, okay? And a camera inside the fish lab is great in case you happen to have some vandalism of sorts, but also you can see what students are coming in, okay? And that is my best advice on feeding fish. So, how do you end up getting water into your fish lab? You want to be able to have water exchanges, and also you want to be able to have fresh water coming in, okay? And obviously it depends on what your locality is. Some people might be where they'll have fresh water available at all times that's not chlorinated. There's a good thing to do is to be able to take a little bit of water off from time to time, using timers, pump out some water, or have something opened up. Right now we're taking some water out of the system, and what we have is a ball float, and that's what maintains the water for our system. Now you'll have a safety inspector that'll come to the school, and they will tell you that you need to have a backflow protector on your fish lab. Well, with the ball float you should not need one, and that was one argument that I ended up winning. They wanted us to put in a $400 backflow protector on our fish lab and have to have a certified plumber that would do it. I just simply said, you know, you don't have to have one on your toilet, and it's got a ball float, so why should I need to have it on our fish lab? So use a ball float to bring in water for your fish lab if you can. So let's say everything should hit the fan, and this will happen especially when you have tilapia. You'll come in and all the fish will be up at the surface, and they'll just be gulping for air. They'll all be right here next to the standpipe. You might have enough water flow, you might have enough oxygen, but what's actually happening is nitrites are binding to the hemoglobin in the gills, and oxygen's not able to get on. In fact, when these fish die, you'll be able to cut them open, and you'll be able to see their blood, and it'll all be brown because oxygen hasn't been able to get on there. And so the solution, until you get a water exchange and you can get the nitrites taken care of, and you got to get the water off. But if you use salt, you'll be able to have the salt bind with the hemoglobins in a way that the nitrites won't be able to get on there. And so when it comes to salting the fish, you'll want to salt them anytime you think that there's an oxygen problem. If they look patchy, if they look stressed, if there's a disease issue, if you have parasites, you'll want to use salt. And up until this point, I have yet to kill any fish by putting too much salt on them. And I'd like to blame our science teachers that have made us put salt water on our paramecium and watch them completely implode. And then we come across this idea that these fish, being a freshwater species, that they're not allowed to have any salt. And they will tolerate salt for a period of time. In fact, to even get the parasites off of some of these fish, if they have external parasites, you're looking at a 30-minute holding that you have to have with a salt solution. And this is a pelletized salt. As long as it's salt, it doesn't matter. I've even had people tell me to drop a 50-pound block of salt into a fish tank. I've never gone to that extreme, but I'll use a third of a bag of the extra coarse. That's my favorite. It's got a great surface area, and it'll dissolve much quicker, because if you're going to need to get salt to those fish, I like it to start to dissolve as quickly as possible. So that's what you need to do in case you have an issue with those fish.